Hello! Welcome back to another episode of me watching the same show over and over again until I inevitably go insane. Squid Game has a lot of interesting characters, but for me the most interesting characters are the ones no one talks about. The randoms, as you will. They are usually just supposed to exist to show what would happen to the main characters and the audience what would happen to you if you mess up in one of the games. In the end, none of those randoms are going to survive anyways, but what if a bunch of randoms did make it to the finale? Well, that's exactly what happened in Season 3, and honestly, even though a lot of people complain about it, I thought it was really funny that the majority of finalists were randoms. But out of the 4 randoms, there is one that I think had some of the most wasted potential. He was another throwaway character that would have greatly benefited from more screen time. I'm talking about player 353. He was one of the more intelligent and reasonable low players, but what led to his downfall, and how did he manage to make it this far into the game? Let's find out in this episode of D1 Squid.
One more game!
The first time we see him is surprisingly not in red light green light, since his icon is nowhere to be found, but if you take a look at it later, you can see that his picture is very blurry, and it's impossible to see if he actually smiled. This might surprise you, but he actually appears in the Hawk to a game for 1 second. Wait a minute, that's not player 353. Anyways, he gets his first actual screen time after the 3rd vote, where he sits on the O side because in the last round, and all the rounds up to this point, he voted O. His name is Kim Yuntae, and according to the wiki, he was a former math teacher. We don't know how big his debt is, but we can assume it's pretty
massive,
especially when the current price money of 356 million isn't enough for our boy. After the players tie their votes, tension rises and both sides begin provoking each other, but he remains one of the few who doesn't stand up or add fuel to the X side's anger. He wasn't involved in the bathroom fight, and when the O players decide to attack the X players that night, he chooses not to take part in the lights out game, further showing that he is generally opposed to violence, or maybe because he knows he doesn't need to. Nonetheless, it's a pretty smart decision. We don't have to talk about the plot that much, but basically after the lights out game and the failed revolt, everyone is allowed to vote for the 4th time, and the Os win once again, and some of them make fun of Ji-hun for losing basically all of his friends in the revolt. But 353 is not part of them, which is a good example of how not every O player is one of the bad guys, but it also means that we don't get any scenes with him until hide and seek, where he gets a red ball, which means that he will be a seeker. And while the players are arguing with each other about which side has it easier, he just looks at his knife, probably thinking about how he's gonna have to shank someone in the next game in order to survive. The only time he looks up from his knife is when the guards reveal how the players are allowed to switch teams if they find someone who is willing to change teams, but he either doesn't want to or can't find anyone willing to change, because we later see him still being on the red team. But choosing to stay as a seeker actually increases your chances of survival by a lot, as we can see on this graph. Unfortunately for us, we don't get to see him at all in this game, except maybe in this scene, but at this point, I'm just guessing. But he does manage to eliminate someone off screen, and we even know who, thanks to the speaker voice.
Player 350 eliminated. Player 353 pass.
After the game, when we see him go back into the sleeping room, he looks traumatized by what he just did, even though it's really hard to tell later when they're allowed to vote again. And player 149 begs the O players to let them leave. He looks like he's really fighting an inner conflict, because if he left now, he would probably not have enough money to pay off his comically large debt. He proceeds to vote O off screen. We then have to wait until Jump Rope, where he enters the room as one of the first players, and he gets his first line of dialogue. After player 100 asks to himself what this is, he comes to the conclusion that they're gonna have to cross the bridge. When no one steps onto the bridge, and player 203 tries to make player 100 go first, he tells them both that they have time, and that they should think of a solution, which shows that even in this life or death situation, he tries to stay calm and thoughtful, as well as maybe him trying to avoid unnecessary deaths. This off-screen conversation sets up his character for later, which I think is pretty cool. When player 203 pushes this random woman off, he looks horrified, which leads to him going onto the bridge as one of the last players, but only after player 96 stopped pushing players off. But player 96 isn't happy with his kill streak yet and attacks Ji-hun from behind, which leads to them blocking the bridge for the rest of the players, with player 353 being the closest to the goal. He also says that he can't jump anymore and that they should go out of the way, please. Back at the sleeping room, the 8 remaining players try to rest after barely making it through the last game, and player 336 goes over to 353's bed and asks him if he's good with numbers. He nods, since as we know, he is a math teacher. Player 336 asks him how much each player would receive if they would quit right here, and 353 tells him that currently everyone would receive 5.6 billion. Player 336 then tells him that 5.6 is enough for him. Player 353 responds that 353 is also enough for him, but he mentions how player 100 owes 10 billion won, which is a really good call. But just as they're about to consider voting X next round, the guards enter the room to tell them that they're actually 9 players because the frontman was like,
"Wouldn't it be funny if a baby won?"
"No, it's not." So there's this baby that one of the main characters gave birth to, which is now officially a player, which means that it would lower the price and receive just as much money as the rest of the finalists for doing absolutely nothing. Obviously, the rest of the players would get mad about that, because thanks to this, they would now only receive for 0.96 billion. It's still a lot of money, but this is just simply unfair. Grrr. Player 353 is probably the player that crashes out the least and just says how much they lost because of the baby, but he still follows the other O players when they try to eliminate it. But the square guard tells them that they aren't allowed to eliminate the baby in order to keep the games fair. But remember in Season 1 when Sangwoo eliminated heavily wounded Sabyok before the finale? This is literally the exact same thing, just that instead of player 67, it's this baby. Anyways, they all get their suit and finalists meal, and are now allowed to vote one final time if they want to keep playing or leave with the 4.9 billion. But not before one of the square guards tells them that for the final game, they're allowed to choose which players will get eliminated, and that only a minimum of 3 players have to get eliminated. And 353 asks if more than 3 players can get eliminated, which the guard responds with yes. And since the vote will be held in reverse player numbers, he gets to vote as the second player, and he votes O because he thinks that he will make it through the next game no matter what. Also, just look at that greedy smile. The majority votes O once again. 353 tells everyone to enjoy their final meal, and before they go to sleep, they come together to form an alliance and tell themselves that they're only going to eliminate Minsu, Ji-hun, and the baby.
I said I played these games before!
In the final game, player 353 definitely gets the most attention yet once they understand what the Squid game is really about. 353 becomes the first to suggest that the group should vote to decide who has to get eliminated, a plan that player 203 enthusiastically supports. Their first target is the baby, arguing that it shouldn't even be part of the game in the first place. However, 353 quickly realizes that player 456 would never give up that baby so easily. So instead, they turn their focus to Minsu. 353 tries to convince Minsu to eliminate himself without threatening him, but his efforts fail. In the end, they push Minsu off with the first pull. Later on the triangle platform, the remaining O players discuss once again that it would make the most sense to eliminate the baby for a variety of reasons. 353 takes the pole and tries to reason with Ji-hun, suggesting that he could simply hang the baby onto the pole and look away. But Ji-hun uses his speech 100 on him and tells him that if 353 pushes them both off now, they'll have to sacrifice one of their own to survive in the next round. In that moment, 203 presses the start button, which means that they're now slowly running out of time, and he realizes that he might be the weakest of them, and they might team up on him if he pushed both of them off now. So he steps back to think of a better solution. 203 tries to take away his pull to push for 156 and the baby off himself. 353 doesn't want that to happen, and he tells him to stop acting like an idiot and think for a second, which almost escalates into a fight between them, but they manage to calm down to 103 and try to think of a solution. They go with 333's plan, where someone has to rip the baby out of 456's arms, then they can push off for 156 and move on to the final shape. The plan fails miserably, and 333 betrays his team, eliminating 336 to reveal that he's the baby's father and that he is now teaming with Ji-hun.
Wow! I mean, who saw that coming?
333 now tells Ji-hun how they're the only two people with weapons and how they can just choose who they want to eliminate now. Which 100 and his team also realize, and they offer to draw lots fair and square, but 456 and 333 don't want that, so the Team 100 has no choice but to turn this other guy into mush and call him Lunchbox. Player 100 tells 333 and 456 how they are just going to make him as weak as possible in order to throw him off on the last platform. 353 and 203 even break his leg so that he can't crawl away. It's really messed up, sure, but at the same time it's the only guaranteed way to ensure the survival of the rest of the players and the baby. 353 is the only one to not say anything while turning 039 into their lunchbox, showing how even he knows that it isn't the right thing. But he also has no other choice. They can't in lunchboxify him now. Ji-hun tells them to get away from 039. This distracts him just enough for 203 to surprise attack him, while 353 attacks 333. They have this tug-of-war kind of fight where 353 completely cooks 333, but he somehow manages to get up again and wins the upper hand against 353. 353 is about to fall and begs 333 to let him live, which he could have easily done, but instead he chooses to just push him off, eliminating him and placing him at 7th place and ending his character arc. Alright, 353 was a rather interesting character. It's just that he isn't really that relevant to the story. None of what he did was very memorable. I wish they showed his greedy side a little more, or just somehow made him less likable, so that it at least makes more sense for him to go out like this. I still think that he is a very underrated character that you could argue wasn't even that much of a villain, but whatever, I hope you enjoyed this video. Goodbye.